There have been 45 presidents in the history of the United States, and by the time this video is being uploaded, 39 of them have passed away. Today, we're breaking down what killed every U.S. president, friend, in the strange, shocking, and sometimes unbelievable circumstances surrounding many of their deaths. From 4 presidential assassinations to a top-secret surgery performed on a fishing boat, these stories are far more dramatic than you might expect. God bless America. And P-whoop. George Washington was killed by his doctors. That's what I think anyway. In 1799, then-retired President Washington developed a sore throat. His condition worsened over the next few days, despite the efforts of several physicians. Of course, in 1799, medical treatment was very poor, as doctors often believed the best way to treat ailments was by balancing the humors, meaning they would balance the amount of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile within the body. That makes no sense. Over the course of several days, doctors drained Washington of 32 ounces of his blood, gave him blisters in his throat, forced him to vomit, and filled him with enemas. No surprise, Washington passed after several days of this medieval torture. I do wonder if Washington would have lived longer had he just hydrated well and maybe got a Z-Pack. John Adams lived until 90 years old, the longest living president until Ronald Reagan. When he died of heart failure, likely related to arteriosclerosis, a blockage of your arteries due to plaque buildup usually occurring with old age or poor lifestyle habits. Strangely enough, Adams died on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years to the day he signed a Declaration of Independence, and just 5 hours after Thomas Jefferson, who died the same exact day. Boo, spooky. The cause of his death is not conclusive, but it was likely due to a variety of elements, such as diarrhea, kidney damage, and an enlarged, possibly cancerous, prostate. America's shortest president at just 5'4", James Madison lived until the age of 85 when he died of congestive heart failure, where the heart's ability to pump blood deteriorates, causing fluid buildup throughout the body. While specific details are now well recorded, James Monroe died in 1831 after a battle with tuberculosis, a bacterial infection that usually attacks the lungs, and while he may have been only America's 5th president, at the time of his death, he joined Adams and Jefferson to become the 3rd president to die on July 4th. The fact of former presidents dying on July 4th was not lost on the American people, with the trend becoming a bit of a mid-1800s meme. John Quincy Adams served 1 term as president and then became the first to die in office, though not in office as president. You see, after losing the election of 1829, John Quincy Adams continued his public service by holding Congress for 9 terms. At the age of 78, during a contentious debate over the Mexican-American War on the floor of the House of Representatives, Adams collapsed, suffering significant stroke where there's decreased circulation to the brain leading to neurological damage. He died at his home 2 days later, but not before what must have been a spectacular emergency on Capitol Hill. Andrew Jackson suffered a long and slow decline in health before dying at the age of 78. The cause of his death, though, has been widely disputed, some attributing it to the use of the medication, calomel, leading to heavy metal poisoning, but JAMA states he probably died of kidney failure with full body swelling, known at the time as dropsy. While it's not entirely certain what killed Martin Van Buren, many sources, including his obituary in the New York Times, cite issues originating within his chest. It's likely his decline began with a long infection leading to cardiopulmonary failure. Now things get interesting. William Henry Harrison delivered a 2-hour inaugural address in freezing drizzle, without a coat or gloves, which many people believe to be the cause of pneumonia, an infection of the lungs, which killed him only 1 month into serving office. In 1841, germs had not been discovered. Germ laughs. Germs everywhere. Television static. Rather, doctors believed the most effective medical treatments were to, just like with Washington, balance the humors. Doctors blistered the president and made him drink substances that forced him to vomit and have diarrhea. Of course, none of those methods actually worked. Coughs. And so William Henry Harrison remains our president with the shortest stint in office. John Tyler took over for William Henry Harrison and served the remainder of that term as president. Historians claim he was never very healthy to begin with and died in 1862 of a stroke. He remains the only president in U.S. history not to be buried with the Stars and Stripes, as he was a darling of the Confederacy, and was buried with their flag instead. James K. Polk had grand visions of his life after the presidency, leaving Washington on the southern tour of the U.S., eventually hoping to end in Nashville, where he had purchased a large home. Unfortunately, Polk died 3 months after leaving office, the shortest post-presidency stint in American history, from cholera, a diarrheal disease caused by drinking contaminated water. You did you. Uh, Zachary Taylor served a year in office before dying under what many would say are suspicious circumstances. To this day, many claim he was poisoned by pro-slavery Southerners. The cause of his death was so controversial that in 1991, his descendants actually agreed to have his remains exhumed for testing, which did not find a high enough volume of arsenic inside his remains to suggest a definitive poisoning. A more common theory is he contracted cholera or dysentery after celebrating the 4th of July in Washington, D.C., which at the time had primitive sewers, often resulting in food and water contamination. Millard Fillmore is rumored to have been the White House's first health-conscious president, avoiding alcohol and tobacco. He did die from a stroke at the age of 74. Franklin Pierce died at the age of 69 from cirrhosis of the liver, likely due to a lifetime of heavy drinking. Alcohol abuse damages the liver directly, as ethanol is a toxin, which leads to inflammation and massive swelling within the gut. James Buchanan is considered by many to be the worst president in the history of the United States, as he did nothing to preserve the Union before handing a country divided by slavery to Abraham Lincoln. You are useless. Information on his death is far and few between, with most reports claiming he died at the age of 77 from pneumonia. Abraham Lincoln. Gun. Next. Just kidding. Though the death of Abraham Lincoln is probably the most well-known on this list, it's not without its intrigue. Just 5 days after the Union victory of the Civil War, famous actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth snuck into Lincoln's box at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., and fired a .44 caliber single-shot Derringer pistol directly into the back of Lincoln's head from just inches away. Lincoln immediately fell into a coma and died across the street 7 hours later. This we know, but here are the juicy details that are oft heavily detailed notes on Lincoln's final hours, and his following autopsy were taken by the president's personal physician, Dr. Robert Stone, which is how we know that Dr. Stone did nothing to help the situation by using his finger to probe the wound and search for the bullet, putting unnecessary pressure inside the president's brain at his most vulnerable time. Look, he was going to die no matter what they did, but a dirty, gloveless finger inside the brain probably didn't help. Andrew Johnson became the first president to go on and serve in the Senate after his presidency and died of a stroke at the age of 66. Ulysses S. Grant was an avid cigar smoker, which was a likely cause of his throat cancer that killed him at the age of 63. It was this death that largely sparked Americans' fear of the disease, which we still see today. Rutherford B. Hayes died at the age of 70 of complications after a heart attack. Assassination number 2, only 18 months into his presidency, James A. Garfield was shot on a train platform in Baltimore, Maryland, by Charles Julius Guiteau, a lawyer and author who was deeply disillusioned, believing he was instrumental to Garfield's election and therefore furious when he was not rewarded with his own political appointment. Guiteau was executed after being found guilty of murdering Garfield, but not before he argued that he didn't kill Garfield. Rather, Garfield's doctors were to blame. While Guiteau was no doubt responsible for pulling the trigger, gunfires, firing a bullet into Garfield's back, the thing is, he might be right. What? Reports indicated the bullet created 3.5-inch wound in Garfield's abdomen, with the bullet finally resting in a benign location between his groin and navel. It took 3 months for the infection to kill Garfield, but not before countless doctors used their fingers and tools to open the wound to 20 inches in width in an endless search for this bullet. It wasn't just the doctors either, as famed telephone inventor Alexander Graham Bell used the world's first metal detector to provide a general location of this bullet. Countless physicians have debated the exact cause of Garfield's death and will never be able to say for sure, but had doctors simply sewed Garfield up and allowed him to rest, he may not have died from this gunshot wound after all. Chester A. Arthur died 2 years after leaving office from a significant cerebral hemorrhage thought to have been caused by his hypertension or high blood pressure. Grover Cleveland died of a heart attack at the age of 71, but that's far from the most interesting event in his medical history. In the summer of 1893, at the beginning of a second term in office, he felt a lump in the roof of his mouth. His doctor diagnosed it as cancer and recommended having it removed immediately. Cleveland feared news of him having cancer would shake the stock market and disrupt the nation, so he opted for a secret surgery aboard a yacht during a 4-day fishing trip. This is a secret. 6 surgeons numbed the president up with ether, successfully removed the tumor, 5 teeth, and a large part of his upper left jawbone in just 90 minutes, swaying back and forth in the waves of the Atlantic Ocean. Because the surgery was inside the president's mouth and his signature mustache remained intact, Cleveland hid the surgery from the public. Despite whirling rumors, smear campaigns, and discrediting journalists, the operation remained unconfirmed for 24 years before one of the doctors broke their silence and finally told the truth. Benjamin Harrison was the grandson of President William Henry Harrison, and just like Grandpa, he died of pneumonia at the age of 68, assassination number 3. 6 months into his second term in 1901, William McKinley was shot twice in the abdomen by Leon Frank. Yeah, that's the hardest name. By Leon Frank Czolgosz, making the 3rd U.S. president to be assassinated in 36 years. Czolgosz lost his job during that economic panic of 1893 and became a believer in anarchism, or a terrorist movement sweeping across Europe that seek to assassinate world leaders. Czolgosz approached McKinley in a crowded building at a festival in Buffalo, shook his hand, and fired 2 shots from a .32 revolver. One bullet bounced off a button and didn't harm McKinley, but the other penetrated his abdomen. McKinley was rushed to a nearby hospital where surgeons sewed up the entry and exit wounds from the bullet in the president's stomach, though the bullet was never found. Doctors were optimistic for a healthy recovery in the following days, but a week or so later, they discovered his wounds had become gangrenous, where parts of the body begin to die and cause deeper infection. It was the death of William McKinley that ignited a national discussion about protecting the president, with Congress ultimately charging the Secret Service with that exact duty in 1906. Theodore Roosevelt died in his sleep in 1919 when a blood clot entered his lung. Future Vice President Thomas R. Marshall famously said, "Death had to take Roosevelt sleeping, for if he had been awake, there would have been a fight." William Howard Taft was our nation's heaviest president, at one point reaching 340 pounds and died at the age of 72, after lingering in a coma caused by complications with high blood pressure, heart disease, and inflammation of the bladder. Drumroll. Time for my favorite one. While in office, Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke in 1919 that paralyzed his left side and nearly blinded him. Out of fear that the news would shake the country, Wilson and his inner circle kept the president's health a complete secret, hiding him away where he could only be seen by his personal physician and his wife Edith Wilson, the star of this story. While it's never been conclusively proven, it is believed that instead of serving as the intermediary between her husband, the president, and the cabinet actually running the country, Edith took it upon herself to make countless executive decisions, effectively serving as America's first female president. Where's that movie? Woodrow Wilson survived the remainder of his term and died 3 years later of further complications from his stroke. Warren G. Harding died in office at the age of 57 from what is believed to have been a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. His cause of death is not entirely conclusive because his wife refused an autopsy. Calvin Coolidge died alone in his bedroom from coronary thrombosis, or a clot in the coronary artery blocking blood flow to the heart. Herbert Hoover lived 31 years after leaving the White House amidst the Great Depression. In 1962, Hoover was diagnosed with colon cancer and had a tumor removed from his large intestine. 2 years later, his intestines ruptured, causing massive bleeding, leading to a coma, and his eventual death in 1964. Franklin Delano Roosevelt holds the record for most presidential terms, having won 4 elections in a row from 1932 until his death in office. In 1944, a team of physicians performed the full assessment of FDR and found he was suffering from numerous heart issues, high blood pressure, and bronchitis, likely all of these caused by a lifetime of smoking and heavy amounts of tobacco. Despite his declining health, he ran for a 4th presidential term, privately saying he would resign once World War II was over. The stress eventually overwhelmed Roosevelt in April of 1945, resulting in a brain bleed while posing for a portrait. He collapsed and died shortly thereafter. Harry Truman was hospitalized for 22 days at the age of 88 because of heart failure, heart arrhythmia, and kidney failure. He became comatose due to sepsis, the body's life-threatening response to an infection, and died the night after Christmas in 1972. At one point, Dwight D. Eisenhower smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day, which contributed to years of heart issues. He suffered several heart attacks and even survived numerous cardiac arrests. No surprise he died of heart failure in 1969. He did beat Hitler, though. John F. Kennedy may have had the most complex medical history out of any U.S. president. He is known to have had, or was speculated to have, the following conditions and diseases: scarlet fever, measles, whooping cough, chickenpox, severe spastic colitis or IBS, Cushing's syndrome, urinary tract infections, prostatitis, Addison's disease, malaria, adrenal insufficiency, and chronic back pain, amongst others. Despite his countless health problems, his back issues were the one that played a role in his infamous assassination in Dallas in 1968, specifically the back brace that he wore because of failed back surgeries. Hidden underneath his suit, it actually prevented Kennedy from ducking after being hit with the first bullet. Who fired the bullet? Well, that's a video for a different channel. Lyndon B. Johnson was a hero of the Democratic Party for passing groundbreaking civil rights legislation in the 1960s, and he was also the hero of the Party for going hard with food, alcohol, and cigarettes. In a famous interview with Walter Cronkite, LBJ said smoking calmed him down, and it was better for his heart to smoke and be relaxed than not smoke and be nervous. An interesting hypothesis that probably contributed to the heart attack that killed him at his Texas ranch in 1973. Richard Nixon was 81 years old when a blood clot in his left atrium became dislodged and traveled to his brain, causing a stroke. He quickly fell into a coma and died 4 days later. Gerald Ford died in 2006 with a death certificate that cites arteriosclerotic cerebrovascular disease and diffuse arteriosclerosis, or a thickening of arterial walls causing poor circulation, leading to organ damage. Ronald Reagan spent the final 10 or so years of his life in a losing battle with Alzheimer's disease, where brain cells and connections die slowly, causing loss of memory and other issues. He eventually died in 2004 from pneumonia. And finally, our most recent, George H.W. Bush, who in 2012 was diagnosed with vascular Parkinsonism, or a type of deterioration of brain tissue from blocked small blood vessels affecting motor function, necessitating the use of a mobility scooter and limiting his speech. The condition slowly worsened into his 90s, and he died on November 30th, 2018.